Southeastern Conference with the LSU Tigers, the Bayou Bengals. Matt Anderson from One Team One Podcast is in the house. How you doing, Matt?
Good, buddy. How are you doing, man?
Man, I couldn't be better. It's a little bit warm down here, but that's expected for Central Florida.
Raining
So
here, raining here every day. So
yeah, every day about 3 o'clock it rains here. It's absolutely bizarre.
for sure.
Um, so we're going to talk a little bit about an LSU preview. We're not going to talk about the Ole Miss LSU game, but we're going to talk about the actual football team.
Yep.
What is the 30,000-foot view of the LSU football team this season?
I think we saw a little bit of this. I tweeted this the other day about the media days. There's this whole 2019, of course, was the epitome of. I mean, everybody's trying to get to that level, right? Where you're the best team in the country, probably one of the best teams of all time, and then you go from 2019 to 2020, where everything seemed to be out of sorts. Everything was discombobulated. There was a lot of coaching problems. There was communication issues. There was off the field stuff like crazy, and everything went wrong. And I think here in Baton Rouge, there is a lot of optimism that LSU is back in a good spot where we have the right assistant coaches, we have great players and great talent. Ed Ogeron's got his head on right this year, and we're in a sleepy position ranking wise, where people may not be picking us to win and stuff like that. I hear a lot of 9-3 discussions out there, but I think there's an opportunity for this team to make a leap, similar how the leap back went from 15-0 to 5-5. There's another leap that's going to happen again this year because you got the right pieces in place.
Now we're talking about the right pieces in place, and is it going to be what are we looking like at the quarterback position? Is Max Johnson going to be the guy, or is Miles going to take it?
I think it's going to be Max. I think that we lost Derry Rosenthal just recently, got popped again for some weed issues, and everybody kind of knows what it is here. But we have a strict compliance department at LSU, and people might laugh at that, but it's probably the strictest compliance department in the league. He immediately goes, and you've seen Eric Gilbert do the same thing. He immediately goes to Georgia, and all of a sudden he's eligible. And then you have Dari Rosenthal. He's automatically eligible at Kentucky, so he's going to be their starting left tackle. But with our left tackle now gone, and we're replacing a left tackle, we have a guy that's going to step in and will probably do great, Cam Wire. But it makes you think more about a lefty quarterback like Max Johnson. We have a solid right tackle in Austin Deculus. He was just at the media days. It makes a lot of sense to have a left-handed quarterback in, especially one that's mobile like Max Johnson is. I think those are the biggest differences between Max Johnson and Miles Brennan, is that one is mobile and one is not. So I think the edge is going to be for Max Johnson at this point, because I think he probably fits the RPO model that Jake Peetz is probably bringing in here, the same stuff that we had in 2019 with Joe Brady. But also, I think that you could also see this race, this quote unquote race, go all the way up to the UCLA game. And I would not be surprised to see Miles Brennan get playing time in the UCLA game. The biggest fear that I think LSU fans have is that you're going to name Max Johnson the starter and Miles Brennan's going to immediately transfer out, and you're left with two scholarship quarterbacks.
Yeah, that I can understand a bit. Speaking of 2019 and going back to the RPO system, what made that team special was Clyde Edwards-Helaire. That team would not be near the offensive juggernaut it was without him. What do y'all got right now? How does that look?
Well, we've had the same backs for 3 years now, which is Ty Davis Price and John Emery. You have some young guys that are going to come in the equation again this year too, but those guys are studs. I think last year did him no justice. Our offensive line was in shambles. The entire team was in shambles, and I think there's a lot of players that didn't play up to their potential, and one of them was John Emery. The guy's got so much talent. He was a 5-star running back coming out of high school here. I mean, Georgia wanted him like crazy. He actually committed to Georgia and then decommitted from Georgia. So if you can see the talent is all there, I think you just got to put them in the right positions. And I think last year we did a terrible job of putting players in the right positions. You didn't get guys out in space. You didn't get guys in good matchup positions like you saw in 2019. We would have Clyde Edwards-Helaire split out on a linebacker or a safety, and you knew it was a problem. Like you knew it was an absolute mismatch. We didn't see a whole lot of that last year. There wasn't enough imagination to the offense, and I think bringing these new these new coaching hires in for the offensive side is going to make the world of difference. Jake Peets coached. He was the running backs coach at Carolina Panthers when Christian McCaffrey was there. So you should know a little bit more about the way they're going to utilize backs is probably going to be a lot different than anything you saw last year.
Yeah, and it makes sense. Now let's go to a little bit, I guess, sadder. I don't know thing. Dave Aranda left in a 3-4 defense. Went to Bo Pelini. It collapsed. It was an absolute disaster going to a 4-3. What are they looking at now?
I think it was more than just going from a 4-3. I think I talked to a former LSU linebacker about this on a podcast before, and he said this early in the season when we were just coming off of Mississippi State and Missouri last year. He said this, and I'll never, ever forget it. He said, man, when you go from a guy like Dave Aranda, who is talking to players in a certain way, very calm and collected, but very professional and commands attention, to a guy who is going to be brash, in your face, probably yelling at you, things like that, there's a different dynamic there. And I think it got completely lost on these players. I think the way that Bo Pelini presented everything to the players was immediately lost. Something was wrong from the get-go. You had guys that didn't know how to guard a wheel route at the beginning of the season. I mean, the 623 passing yards against Mississippi State, most of them was to Kylan Hill on a wheel route. So it was that easy. Anybody could have done that. But I think the difference this year is you got a guy like Durante Jones. I've been out, had drinks with Durante, so I can tell you that he is a cool cat and is going to get the attention of the players and not just yell at them, but like they're going to respect him, and they know that he's coming from an NFL background. I think there was a lot of problems last year, and that was one of the biggest was just players relating to coaches. And they didn't help themselves out, obviously, but I don't know what was the biggest. Nobody could put their finger on what caused that problem from the beginning, but it was evident all the way to the first game of the season.
Yeah, I don't know if you know this. I was the video coordinator for Ed Orgeron at Ole Miss in 2006. So I do know a little bit of how it works inside, let's say, his staff.
Locker room.
Yeah. So one problem that I think you had is Dave Aranda was so analytical. It was not so much piling on because Ed Orgeron is a yeller. He is an absolute yeller. You may not understand what he's saying. You may not be able to comprehend what's happening. You just know that you messed up by his reaction.
Right.
Dave Aranda being so analytical, he could be the guy pat you on the back. He's like, it's going to be fine. You just do this right here. When Bo Pelini came in, my first thought was there's going to be a fist fight on the sideline. And second, this isn't going to work. This is going to just drive players into the ground.
Yeah, and maybe he needs a softer tone to match him, that kind of style. And I actually like the role that Ed is in, where he's the CEO type of coach. He's not too much on one side, not too much on another side. Obviously, he's a defensive line coach, and everybody knows that. But I like having these other guys that are in place that are young, and they can connect with a player. And last year, it seemed like it was the worst. I don't know what happened after the national championship game, but I've said this analogy. It felt like Coach O took a break. And he didn't come back from that break until probably, I would say, after the Missouri game. And then it was almost too late, and he had to try to right it, and everything did get fixed a little bit before that Florida game. And the wheels were about to roll off if that Florida win didn't happen last year.
Yeah, and when he was at Ole Miss, and like I said, when he was at Ole Miss and when he's in LSU, is not really the same thing. But one of
Sure.
the dangers with Ed Orgeron is quicksand. He
Yeah.
will work and work and work, and all of a sudden, it'll become a cycle of failure if you let it happen. That Florida game, you needed some goodwill. You needed something good to happen.
Oh, absolutely.
You needed Matt Corral to throw 5 interceptions towards the end of the year, or else that game would have been trouble. And you were able to get that back to 5-5 with a little bit better taste in your mouth over what could have been an absolute disaster of a season.
Yeah, I think when we had heard, I mean, we were hearing rumors left and right,
Mm.
especially after Eric Gilbert and Terrace Marshall opted out. We were hearing like, man, if that Florida game goes like we think it's going to go, which was not good, you could have saw another 5 to 10 guys opting out after that game. But it felt like everything at the end of the season was pointed in the right direction. And I think the hires, even though the defensive coordinator hire didn't go the right way, I think they've found somebody with Durante Jones. And I'm telling you, just meeting with the guy, you just feel like, okay, this is a guy who's going to be a head coach. And Ed Ogeron said the same thing about Pete's the other day, saying this is a head coach in a couple of years. I don't think people realize that yet, but he's on that trajectory for sure.
Yeah, with the talent that LSU has, there should not never be a real dip. The dip for LSU should be like 8-4.
Yep.
So whenever you go 5-5 or something like that, alarm bells are going to go off. But I expect them to correct it. I don't. I now another deep secret. I'm from South Mississippi, so if I was not an Ole Miss fan, if that wasn't ingrained in me when I was a little boy, I would have been an LSU fan. I grew
Okay.
up. I actually went to Tiger Stadium a few times. I had a blast. But LSU fans aren't going to stand for a cratering. They're not going to stand for anything really less than about an 8-4, and even then, that got Les Miles run off.
Mhm. Yeah, well, and
So,
there's a difference in the Les Miles and Ed Ogeron, but
mm,
I will say this: at 7-5, I don't expect Ed Ogeron to be the coach after that. I think he would need to be better than 7-5. We've said that before, but I actually expect this team. I think the floor is 9-3 this year, and we were picking 10-2. And I'll be straight up with you: 10-2. Obviously, one of the losses that I'm just going to always pick is going to be Alabama. We're going to Alabama. The second loss, I have a hard time finding. And I can't tell you who the second loss is going to be yet. There's all these different teams, of course, that we can pick from, but I can't just straight up and tell you like I can with the Alabama game. Like, okay, I got to pinpoint that one as a loss, which means I think we have a lot of winnable games. Of course, things can happen and bad stuff can happen, and that's why I'm saying 9-3 is a floor. 8-4, man, I think is a disaster for this team.
okay. Yeah, it could actually be. And, if you get down at this 6-6, if last year redo happens again, if they
Mm-hmm.
misstep upon misstep, it's going to be a problem in Baton Rouge because of what you said. The expectations are of a 9-3, 10-2 type season.
Yeah, and I think if you got to a 7-5, something went way wrong in the locker room. I think that's the only way to derail this team right now is if something really bad is going on in the locker room, and you can actually take that all the way back to before 2018. It was 2017 when we had Danny Etling. We had the offensive coordinator that came in that was running motion all the time and everything like that, and that apparently Ed Ogeron and the offensive coordinator got in some feuds about the offense, and there was a lot of stuff behind the scenes and in the background of that year that created turmoil. And we didn't have that in 2018. You had a younger team. You didn't have Joe Brady yet, too. Joe Brady did make a world of difference for Joe Burrow. People don't remember the difference between 2018 Joe Burrow and 2019 Joe Burrow. So there's a lot of purple and gold sunglasses on in Baton Rouge, but I think with having the same offensive philosophy in the building again that you had in 2019, plus with all the talent that we have on offense, plus you got a new defensive coordinator that's not named Bo Pelini. I think you got a lot of thought for success, and we just say it's 10-2. I actually see us beating Texas A&M. A lot of people are talking about this Ole Miss game. I know you don't want to talk about that one, but I felt like last year, if you were going to get us, it was going to be last year. I just don't know if our offense is on the same level that we think it should be. I just don't know how anybody's going to stop us.
Yeah, I understand that. And going back to that 2018 Joe Burrow game, there was a pass against Auburn leading that comeback that was just absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah,
And looking back at it, that was the precursor. It's like, okay, this is going to be a number one draft pick.
yeah. Well, and it's he
Mm,
had talent. He could see the field.
mm,
In 2018, you didn't necessarily have him in the right offense. Joe
mm.
Brady comes in and says, "No, this is the offense, and Joe Burrow is going to explode in this offense." So then 2020, we take 2019, you know what happened, but 2020, it felt like we took a step back and we were screaming to the top of our lungs saying, if it worked as well as it worked in 2019, why would you change anything to your offense? Anything. And I know defense was our main issue last year, but why would you ever change what worked so well? Just replace the players. And I understand that Max Johnson or Miles Brennan, they're not as good as Joe Burrow, and they're not going to put up the same, yardage and all that stuff. But you have to place them in that same position, right? Like we just didn't. We never understood that here, and I think it was a lot of stubborn people in the coaching office. And Steve Ensminger, he's been there for a long time. But you also had Scott Linehan. You had guys like that were putting their imprints on the offense that didn't need to be changed from what Joe Brady left.
Yeah, and I think a little bit of that is Steve Ensminger trying to call a Joe Brady offense. He
Yeah.
can't do it exactly. A copy of a copy is not going to be as sharp as the original. And Steve
Sure.
Ensminger, God bless him, he's so old, was going. He's seen iterations of football when LSU was running some semblance
Yeah.
of the power I back in the day.
That's right. I think he actually ran a wishbone at one point when he was at LSU. So
Yeah.
we're not far off from that. He's seen every single level of football. Yeah, so I think that Jake Pete's coming in. I've seen this guy. There was right when he got hired, I found this video on YouTube of Jake Pete's cutting down film at the Carolina Panthers when he was the quarterback's coach. And he was cutting up film, and the way he was talking, I was like, "This is a home run!" Like this guy, he speaks to you like a professional offensive coordinator for one. It's not he has no twang in his accent. It is very much professional sounding, and just realizes that you're going to be in a room with professional coaches that coach for LSU.
All right, and while I have you on the horn, I do have a question for you. I know you like that bye week before the Alabama game. I know Alabama does it, and y'all do that. But Ole Miss and LSU should be at Halloween, right?
I agree with that. I'm an old school guy, so I'm in my
Mm.
40s. So I can tell you that I remember LSU, Ole Miss always being on Halloween. My dad would tell me absolutely it should be on Halloween, but I do love the off week before Alabama.
It's necessary. I
It
get
is
that.
necessary, especially if they have one too. And
Mm.
I don't think that's ever going to change. If while Nick Saban's the coach at Alabama, he's always going to have his off week before LSU.
Yeah, the only thing that could change things is if Jimbo becomes enough of a threat out in College Station, and then
Yeah,
he'll figure out
we
how to
had
get that done.
we were having a discussion about Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M the other day, and
Mm.
I know they're recruiting at a high level, but it seems like what they're recruiting mostly that we're seeing is in the trenches. I'm
Mm.
not seeing the skill positions for Texas A&M to be able to compete at the highest level of the SEC. I think they can beat the teams that they need to beat, but when it gets down to like, okay, you have to beat. I remember there was a Georgia game; they just couldn't score a point against Georgia. LSU, they had trouble scoring against us last year, and we had the worst defense in our history. They scored 13 offensive points against us last year. And I'm like, this is with your best quarterback, quote unquote, that you've had in a long time. I just don't see Jimbo's offense being anything to write home about so far at Texas A&M.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Jimbo has problems offensively. He's dated. The game might have passed him by. The one thing that's going to keep him competitive, though, is he is just recruiting manimals on the defensive line, and that's
Yeah.
going to keep that defense fresh. And they're always going to be in games.
Yeah, I think that then you now remind me of Georgia for the last few years. where Georgia does beat the teams they need to beat, but they're not going to beat an Alabama. They're not going to beat any of the bigger teams in the SEC because they don't have the firepower. Now Georgia, that's interesting you brought that up because now Georgia is the one that supposedly is going towards an open offense in 2021, kind of like how we did in 2019. So I'm interested to see how true that is, and I'm sure people were skeptical of us when we were saying that before 2019 too. Like, oh yeah, sure, you're going to open it up, right? Well, I want to see that, and if Georgia really does that, I know we've have a few mutual friends on Twitter that are saying Georgia's going to win the national championship this year, and if that's the case, they very much could because of their defense that it's already stout as we know.
Yeah, and my only question about them, and I've said this all off season, is will Kirby take his thumb off the offense? That it's one thing to say it; it's another thing when it's 3rd and 4 or 4th and 3 to actually go for it
Right.
and take that risk that you're not willing to do to protect them. Is he going to be okay winning a 27-17 game as opposed to a 17-3 game?
Right. And I think so. If I think about that, Ed Ogeron would love to run the ball down people's throats, right? In 2019, we never gave him that option to call that play. We were in shotgun the entire time. If you want to run the ball, it's going to be with 4 or 5 wides, and we'll either do a quarterback draw or we're going to run it up the middle with Elair spread out. You know.
Yeah, it is unbelievable because it was mostly 5 receivers into the routes. It didn't matter if you blitzed or not. The running back was going out. It was an excellent safety valve. And I don't know if there's been a more special running back come through the SEC in 20-25 years than Edwards-Helaire.
I mean, I'm biased
Yeah,
also, but
yeah.
I think he's so special, and I think LSU's trying to find that guy. We don't have a guy that fits that frame that he had, and that maybe I think John Emery is as quick as he is, and he's probably more explosive actually, but he just did everything perfectly in that offense. There's a guy that's coming in, one of our freshman running backs that's coming in that could be a guy like that maybe in a year or two. We just don't know. But like, yeah, I think they're searching for a guy that's, TDP, Ty Davis Price. He's 230. I mean, he's a bulldog.
Yeah, looks like we lost him there for a second. We're going to keep talking.
Oh,
There
did
he
I
is.
break?
Yeah, you broke up just a second.
Well, so John Emery is the guy that we've been hoping to see catch the ball out of the backfield, some kind of way, and then just take it the distance. And he's got that kind of ability. But yeah, I think we're always going to be searching for the next Clyde.
Yeah, if it's like we were searching for Dexter McCluster for 10 years after it happened.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Anyway, Matt Anderson, One Team, One Podcast. Thank you very much for joining us. This has been the LSU team preview, and we have to do it again whenever we get closer to the game.
Good deal. And we'll get you on for sure, especially before Ole Miss. All right.
Yo,